welcome back to Indigenous Food Friday. I hope you all enjoyed last week's video. I got a lot of great comments from y'all and that was wonderful. I love to hear that you're making it or making your own versions or something that maybe you've made for a while. So I love that. Now this week's recipe, of course, is going to deal with squash. But it was inspired by a recipe that my daughter learned when she moved back east to go to college. And she learned from a couple of her mentors who are Ojibwe and Abenaki. So, and I loved it. So I just added some of my mom's and grandma's recipe to it. But it's all indigenous, native, natural ingredients. So this does have meat in it. I've got a buffalo ground burger. But if you're vegetarian, you can substitute it with tofu or whatever. I'm not a vegetarian, but it can totally be substituted, or you can just omit it and have it completely, all of this, maybe add nuts instead. It would be just as good. So for this, I'm using half of a Hochunk squash, but you can use any kind of squash. It's best if it's a squash that you'll be able to have a cavity to build in, because we're basically going to cook it all in the squash. Now you can use like a butternut squash, that's fine, but the cavity is a little bit small. So I'm sorry, I have a cat. This is gonna make for a great video. We have a cat who's just had surgery and he's got a cone head and he keeps running into the tripod. Hold on a second. The joy of recording at home with a cat that's in a big cone, the cone of shame. That's a funny story, I might tell you later on. But anyway, so if you use butternut squash or acorn squash, cut it in half, gut the seeds and everything out, save the seeds, and then you can put all of this goodness in the middle, put the top on, wrap it in foil. The same thing, just depending on what kind of squash you're gonna use, you're gonna have to make a couple changes, but it still turns out the same. For this, I'm using Hochunk squash, and we're going to clean out this entire cavity. So I've got meat or protein. Venison does really well with this, elk, moose, but today, like I said, I'm using buffalo squash. I've got mushrooms. These are just mutton mushrooms, button mushrooms. Whenever we find puffballs, they go faster than I can keep up with. So these are just button mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms do really, really well with this as well, and chicken of the woods, but puffballs are also amazing if you can get your hands on those. And then I've got some greens. I've got some wild spinach, dandelion greens, and plantain, but if you don't have any of that, that's fine. Just get spinach. I've got some garlic, a couple, traditionally we'd use duck eggs. I don't have ducks, I just have chicken, so we're gonna use a couple of chicken eggs, shallots or wild onions, and then I've got some rosemary and some culinary sage, and then of course salt and pepper. And that's pretty much all you need. I'll put a little bit of sunflower oil around the rim of the squash. Other than that, that's it. So let's get cooking. Okay, so first I'm just gonna cut up the shallots, take the skins off. And if you can't find shallots, you know, it depends on where you're at. Use wild onions. You could use a regular, like a small onion if you've got that at your place. Whatever you have, this is all about sustainability. So if you have to spend a fortune on your meal or hunt all over for it, it's not worth your time. Now these I'm just putting into like sliver sizes. So, actually, I'm going to move this to the side so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so it's about sustainability. It's not about breaking the bank or making you go crazy. Find out what works well for you, what tastes good for you, because you're going to have different tastes than I do, or your kids do, and make it work. Find what you can forage, or that you can get cheap at the farmer's market, or of course that you can grow and be sustainable and self-sustainable. Oh, that's a good good shallots. It's making me cry. Okay, so I've got those shallots done and in with the meat. Now, if you do try a vegetarian version, let me know what kind of protein you use, and that worked. Now I'm gonna get the garlic going. These are big cloves, so I'm doing 3 really big cloves of garlic. Ooh, that was a good shallot. So what would equal about a tablespoon? So whatever math you have there. Ooh, that is like the strongest shallot ever. So I'm gonna rinse this and I'll be back. Okay, that's much better. I'm not having to try to look through my tears anymore. There we go. So I'm just taking the paper skins off of the garlic, and then we're just gonna dice them up. And this is a great meal to do any time of the week. You can also do it like prepare it the night before. That way when you get home, all you have to do is pop it in the oven. That works really well. And you won't have many dishes to clean up at all because we're cooking all of this right inside of our squash. So back to my cat. I need to tell you that story. So last week, so ever since we got him, he's been, I didn't even know cats could get this, but urinary crystals. They're like stones, but crystals, and they get stuck in the male cats, you know. Anyway, we've been treating him, having on special diets and everything and medication for like the last 3 years of his life. And it's just been getting worse. And it can be life-threatening. It can kill them. Anyway, last week he got another blockage and it was bad. He went downhill really fast. This darn cat ended up in ICU. I didn't know they had ICUs for animals. And the closest vet is like an hour and a half away from where we live. So that was great fun. So he was in ICU. There's a surgery that they can do that will stop this problem from happening. And basically what they do is they cut off the rest of his junk, the rest of his stem, the rest of his willy. They cut it off, slice, gone. And then they make a, this is probably TMI, but they make a little, they basically make him into a girl, basically. Yeah, so he's now home, he's out of ICU, he did really well. But now he's home with me. Now we're gonna put the garlic in, and I'm gonna continue this crazy wild story. And so he has to wear this, and he's coming, his name is Zazu, but when he's like this, I call him Zasshole. So now he's in this cone head thing, and he won't let me out of his sight. I can't do anything. I can't bathe, I can't work, I can't shower, I can't go outside without him. He is totally different. So that's what I'm dealing with today. So if the camera moves on its own, it is just Zasshole. If you hear him scraping around in the background, that's just him running into stuff with his cone head. So, the excitement. Okay, so now I've got garlic, onions. I've got here some rosemary. You could use cedar, would be delicious. Cedar, what else could you use? Even pine, just a little bit of pine. But cedar is fantastic. But I have rosemary that I just grow out in the garden. So I'm gonna get some of these beautiful rosemary leaves off of the woody stem. That smells so good. Oh, and then I've got some culinary sage. Same thing, we're gonna get the leaves off of the stem. And then just carefully cut that up. So if any of you have a similar issue with your male cat, let me know. Let me know if you survived it. Goodness. And it looks terrible. It looks really bad. Yeah. So enough of the cat. By the way, I never liked cats. I was never gonna have a cat ever. And then my daughter's first year of college, she was just finishing up, and we went out to help her move or something. I don't remember, it was a long time ago. And she sent me to PetSmart to get some fish food for her fish. And as I was walking down the aisle to try to find fish food, there was this orange tabby kitten that like jumped out at me from the cage, and something happened at that moment. And so then I came home to help my daughter with fish food and a cat. So that is how my journey being a cat mom has started. Yes, so now we've got that. We're gonna put that right into the meat. Okay. Now, mushrooms. I don't know if I'm going to use all these mushrooms. We'll see. It also depends on how big your squash is, how much you use. Just eyeball it. There's really, I know my daughter hates it because I don't give like exact measurements, but it's about what you have, how much room you have, what you like, what you don't like, what works. So, and if you don't have mushrooms, just omit it. Or you can add something else, maybe peppers or something. That would be good. Just make up your own. This isn't just, Indigenous Food Friday isn't just about making traditional foods that we would make pre-contact or even shortly after contact, and having that food sovereignty. It's about being self-sufficient and self-reliable when it comes to food. Yeah. So this, that is a very large squash, so I am probably going to cut up most of these mushrooms. So are you all getting ready for fall? Well, I guess it's fall now. Goodness. Summer is my favorite season, so I like autumn, but I'd rather it stay summer for a long time. Okay. Now, some onion fell in my pepper. Okay. Now we have to clean out the squash before we go to our next step. Now I have a bowl that I'll keep over here to put the guts and seeds in. And if you didn't catch my last video, I keep at least 2 years worth of seeds on hand. So don't throw those seeds out. For Hochunk squash, it doesn't produce a ton of seeds. So I don't roast these unless I have a ton. I'll keep all of the seeds so that I can gift to other people. I'll have extras if I have a bum crop or if I want to gift them. With Hochunk squash, it is an heirloom seed that's been brought back to life through several tribes who are trying to bring their food sovereignty and their original foods back. And it is a beautiful squash. They get huge. I have one that's about 20 pounds. Yeah. And that one's so huge. I have such a small family here at home that I'll end up just, and maybe I'll do that next week. We'll just be slicing it into thin strips and drying it. So that it will preserve, because that big of a squash, once I cut it open, my little family of 3 and my son who doesn't like squash, will just waste it, and we don't want to do that. Okay, we've got most of this baby cleaned out. And again, you can use any kind of squash. It doesn't have to be Hochunk. Hochunk isn't a squash you can really buy at the grocery store yet, because it is an heirloom seed. But use whatever squash. I can't think of any squash that this would not be good on. Okay. Okay, so now you can see how deep this really goes. So I'm going to be able to make a lot of my meat mixture in there. So we're going to set that aside. Okay, so now I'm going to just lightly spray the outside, like the rim and the inside. And if you don't have a sprayer, that's fine. I just I love it. But spray it with any kind of oil you have. I use sesame oil because it's traditional, it's tasteless, it's super light, and it's good for you. But you could use avocado, you can use olive oil if you wanted to. If you have canola oil and that's all you have, go ahead. Whatever you've got. If you've got butter or ghee, you can use that as well. So we just want a nice layer there. Okay. Now I'm going to salt and pepper the outside of this so that we get the seasoning into the squash. Beautiful. Okay, so now in the bottom of the squash, I'm going to add my greens. Now this is wild spinach, dandelion greens, and plantain. If you don't have that or you can't go forage for it, it's fine. Spinach is fine. You could even use kale, would be fine. Whatever kind of leafy greens, stuff it on in there. And remember, it'll shrink. We know like how you get a whole bunch of spinach and you cook it and it's like a tablespoon. Yeah. So I've got about that much spinach in greens. Another little layer of salt. Now I'm going to put my mushrooms in. Pack that down in there. Look at that. Isn't that perfect? Now, like, you could even just stop right here and then just salt and pepper it again, maybe put on a little cayenne for some heat, and cook it like this if you wanted it vegetarian or vegan. Totally whatever you want. You could even add some almonds on top for some protein. That would be really good. So it's like endless. You don't have to do it exact. You won't die. Just change it around and you'll like it. I really think you'll like it. So we've got that. Next we're going to go to our meat mixture. I'm going to take off my rings, of course, because we're going to get our hands in here. Okay. So I got about a half a teaspoon of pepper we'll put in there. A generous pinch of salt, which is probably like a teaspoon, maybe 2 teaspoons. Yeah, we'll say 2 teaspoons. See, I just don't measure. Do what you feel like. And then I've got a couple of my chicken eggs. Traditionally, it would be duck eggs, but I don't have ducks. So we will do with chicken. Okay, so we've got that in there. Okay, I probably should have done this earlier, but better late than never. I have a foil-lined cooking sheet, and I've transferred the squash with our greens and mushrooms, salt and pepper over to that. Then I've got my meat mixture. We're going to mix that up, yes, with our hands. I've removed my rings, of course. Sorry, I also have the hiccups. I don't even know what. And we're just going to mix this up really good. You know, you could use like a spoon or a mixer if you've got it, but you know, I just use my hands. If you're really leery about it, you can glove up if you want, but you can wash your hands. And of course, wash your hands before you do this, please. And wash your hands after, of course. So you want everything nice and mixed in. You want all of the salt and pepper, our shallots, our herbs. We want it evenly distributed. And then I'm going to kind of make like a loaf, individual loaves. We're going to place that right on top. Now, if you were making like acorn squash or butternut squash this way, you can keep the two halves and then just put the other half on top. Wrap it all together and cook it like that, like so that you've just got the whole thing. I hope that makes sense. With the Hochunk squash, I'm just cooking the one half. So I don't have another half to put on. Plus that would be way too much for my little family that I have still at home. Make sure we don't leave any of the scallions out because they are so good. Evenly distribute that. Okay. Okay, time to wash my hands. Okay, now for the top, I'm going to put a little bit of my tomato powder that I have made. If you don't have this, that's fine. You don't need to use it. This is just one of those recipes where you can use it. It adds a little bit of that tomato flavor. And helps hold everything kind of together. If you don't have tomato powder, that is fine. You can use paprika. You could use a little bit of cayenne. Whatever works for you. Now we're just gonna wrap this up. By the way, if I haven't mentioned it, make sure you're preheating your oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we're gonna just wrap this all up in foil. Traditionally, of course, we didn't have foil, but what we would use would be like corn leaves and the corn shucks. What is that word? Yeah, the corn leaves to wrap it all up in, or mullein leaves. That works really well too. We also would use clay to cook a lot. And I might do that this year, where we would just wrap whatever we're cooking in clay, throw it in the fire, and it's done when you can break it, and you just break it open, and then you've got beautiful food on the inside. That's something I might do later on. So now we're gonna bake this in the oven at 375 for about an hour, hour and a half. It depends on how big your squash is and how much stuff you put in the middle. So, but start checking it at an hour. Just poke it, check the meat. You can use a meat thermometer if you're using meat. And when the meat is all done and the squash is tender, it's done. So meet me back here in about an hour, hour and a half, and I'll show you what we have. Okay, it's just come out of the oven and it looks and smells gorgeous. Now we're just gonna let this sit for about 10 minutes before we cut it up and serve. And you could use this as you've got everything you need for a full meal, but if you wanted to add wild rice or another vegetable as a side dish, that works perfectly. But this is a full meal right here. Okay, so 10 minutes and then we'll cut this up. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, so we're gonna go ahead and just slice this up and plate it. And just do it in like serving pieces. Really, however big you want them. I like to cut them, I think this is about 2 inches thick, just because it's easier to transfer. It's a very filling meal, so you're not going to need a whole lot more than that unless you're like my husband. He could probably eat this whole thing. In fact, he'll probably get this end over here. Beautiful. Okay. Then I'm just going to transfer it over to a serving dish. Look how gorgeous this looks. Ooh, that's hot. Look how beautiful. And you'll know that your family is getting all the nutrition they need and the protein they need. And you didn't have to break the bank to do it. Beautiful. Okay, there you are. Eat up. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think. Drop it in the comments and let's continue the discussion. Let me know what you think. Until then, Bon appetit.